Welcome to the Explorers Podcast with Ken Bowen. Here, Ken connects with friends and peers to discuss issues in the world and practices to improve one's biblical perspective.
Welcome to the Explorers Podcast. I'm Ken Bowen. I'm with my special guest, Cameron McAllister. And Cameron, you and I have talked about beauty together in film and in literature and in poetry and in art. So it's a major thing that draws us together is this mutual quest. And it's a thing that actually ties friends together. They love the same thing. It's not just that they are just loving each other, looking at each other, but they're looking at the same thing, the same good. And we behold beauty side by side.
Yeah, you're making me think of that statement from the Four Loves. You too?
Yeah,
I thought I was the only one.
Right. You find, wait, you have that. And I thought no one else had that. You love that too. And then you begin to build this thing in which you forge the friendship. And it leads to more engagements as we see other paths of convergence in what we love. So with you and me, one of those paths of convergence has been film and all of all its natures, both dark and bright, but also all the nuances that are inside, because we know that film is a great narrative vision of what the whole story of life is about when it's well done. And as you know, my thinking is a story well told always points beyond itself to the greatest story ever told. And so the better told it is, the more powerful it is. And so God's story is found in the world, but it's also found in the Word. And then our response to the world and the Word is the third source of beauty.
Yeah, so it's interesting. You bring in films, and as we consider beauty, I thought I'd begin with ugliness just for a second and talk to you a bit about this, Ken. You bring up films. I set myself a challenge recently to try to, and I was talking to you about this earlier today, a search for genuinely beautiful films. I don't mean well made. I don't mean well executed. There are many films that are very brilliantly made films. They're very artful. They're works of genius, but they're very dark and they're very ugly. Yes. A film that actually gives us a beautiful picture of life that's true and good and beautiful. It has truth in it. So it's the reason I've been wanting to do that is because so much of what's out there right now, in the world of the arts at least, is very ugly.
Yes.
And I think I've heard a lot of, in everyday conversations, this is getting brought up more and more, but I'd sent you an article from Peggy Noonan,
yes,
of all people,
the uglification of everything, which is a great name for things.
And, the uglification of everything.
In which he starts and draws a contrast between the 1999 film The Talented Mr. Ripley and then the Netflix series called Ripley, and they're utterly different.
Well, and this is a pretty common experience. I think I'm finding you'll have a remake of an earlier film, and the remake, there's almost just this unwritten rule where it has to be aggressively dark, and everybody in the film
dark,
everybody in the film is corrupt, evil. But she points out, with regard to The Talented Mr. Ripley, which is, by the way, a devilish mystery, and the 1999 film is superb, but she says with this remake you got a plausibility problem, because the charming sociopath of the story he's not charming at all. He's completely unlikable in this movie. So it doesn't make any sense that anybody would be drawn to him in the first place. But she also she says something that I think, she said a few things that stood out to both of us, but one for me that really haven't been able to get out of my head is, how is it, because she talks about some of the modern remakes of Cabaret.
Cabaret is another example of that, where the original has those nuances, and yes, it has the ugliness, but it also has a fundamental narrative behind it that exhibits beauty and nuanced characters and so forth. And it's not that it all is ugly, but here, this other one is just nothing to love, nothing to like at all. It's just, as she puts it, directors and writers now have nothing to push against because there are no rules or cultural prohibitions. So there's no friction, everything is left cold. The art turns on itself, becomes merely weird and this idea of it's nothing but lifeless and grotesque.
Well, if there's no constraint, she really is right. Earlier works, so the earlier version of Cabaret it's got tension in it. It has some innuendos, but they work as innuendos using that tension.
Yes.
When everything becomes obscene and explicit, you lose that. But she also says, here's what stuck with me. How can something so grotesque and so outlandish also be so trivial?
Yes, exactly how she is. It's tedious.
Tedious.
It's grotesque, frantic. It's an achievement. She says it's almost an achievement that you can make something that banal, that insipid, that tepid, actually become boring, because you see it, you just have nothing in there. But they're looking down, yet they take this idea of this moral ground, to take the high moral ground. We need to disabuse you of your
illusions.
There's a smugness about that, but she correctly says, though, that no, it's not going to. It's going to be, as I like to put it, corroded on the acids of its own assumptions.
I like that. That's a good way to put it. But I think she's speaking for a lot of us. I know a lot of listeners, I'm sure this is true for you. I've turned many things off lately, and not just because they're offensive. Sometimes I'm offended, but for the most part, I just think I'm bored by this.
Yes, it's not worth my time. It's not worth my notice.
It's not, and it's not true to life either, because is there darkness and corruption in the world? Absolutely, of course. That's not news, but there is also genuine goodness, genuine self-sacrifice, and altruism, and heroism, and courage. These are also true and real, and we see them all the time. Many of them, many of these instances of this aren't noticed and don't make the news, but we know this to be true, and so that's why I think there's a genuine hunger for beauty in a way we haven't seen in a while, partly because of this uglification of everything trend in all of the arts, partly because perhaps news has morphed or mutated into a form of sensational entertainment. But Ken, I would like to hear you talk a little bit about beauty in general, because beauty occupies a pretty high place for you in terms of drawing people in.
Yes.
As we talk about Christ,
it's becoming
and the gospel.
more meaningful for me as well. And we'll talk also about some exemplars we were chatting about earlier of beauty in film that is astonishing. And there's something about that. Even though the film may be dealing with some dark topics and subjects, yet there is this motif that somehow redeems it and brings it above that tedium and banality, because there's a sense of the glory of God that still infuses, and nature is charged with the glory of God. It's infused with it. As Lewis put it beautifully when he said, it was when I was happiest that I longed most. So beauty creates for me that sense of Sehnsucht, that longing that for something more, something transcendent, something that's not mundane, something that's top down, not bottom up, something that's not reductionistic, but that is actually transcendent. And the inside out. He went on to say, the sweetest thing in all my life has been the longing to find the place where all the beauty comes from. So that's why the way I put it, I'm in the pursuit of a story-driven amplification of imagination that will winsomely compel people to long for more. And I pack a lot into that statement of story-driven. We need beauty. In our time more than ever, I think we need beauty. We need narrative, a powerful, rich narrative that has it ends well. It's not just going to be some tragedy, but there's a comedic dynamic in which it ends well. So we need beauty, we need narrative, and we need authenticity, not this loneliness of the isolated self who has no friends, although thousands of friends without any real relationships. So we need that authenticity. And I think that's what we're looking for in beauty, is to find what that looks, where does it come from? So I want them to amplify their imagination, to long for more than they would long for in this world.
It's interesting because beauty, genuine beauty, doesn't lead us to a state of total fulfillment and contentment.
No.
Let's talk about that for a second.
Yes. It points beyond itself to something that's evocative, that's something that's liminal, that actually we begin to realize the greater the beauty, the more diaphanous the place becomes. I feel like I'm in a thin space between heaven and earth. There are certain films, and one of the films that we were talking about, you and I, that as an exemplar of beauty, is Enchanted April, and the idea of a beautiful space, in this case northwestern Italy. There's something special about the glory of that created order, the flowers and the birds and the geometries that actually take self-centered people and turn them into better people because they've been touched by something that's sacred. That certain places and times are sacred, so that the beauty evokes them and makes them better people than they would have been before. It's a fascinating image that is used in the film. Yeah.
And I'm thinking just of the everyday circumstances of our lives. When we see something beautiful, if it's a beautiful scene in nature, if we read a breathtaking novel, see a beautiful film, our response is not generally, all right, now I've seen this particular site and I can close the book on it.
No.
We're over and done with. No, that's the beginning.
That's right.
Something opens up when we do that.
That's right. It creates an appetite for more.
And that shows, and so there's a clear pointer to the spiritual nature of our hunger for beauty. I think often of the words, I've been thinking more and more about Frederick Buechner's as food is to the flesh, so beauty is to the soul.
Yes. It nurtures and nourishes. It invites us to a shalom, a harmonious dynamic, in which we see that, even though it's a fallen world, it's astonishing, the harmonious connections that take place in interconnected links. For example, the fungi and the mycelium, and that connects the trees together and so forth. But it's also a collective understanding or mind, like in a termite colony or in an ant. When you see a hive of ants and how they work together and create these hexagonal shapes with the perfect design for optimal strength and storage and so forth. How are they doing? There's a collective whole that goes on. And when things are connected together, there's sort of a network where the total is greater than the sum of the parts. That's, to me, a metaphor of what the body of Christ is supposed to be about in a very real sense, where there's a collective mind that's greater than the individuals. Again, this total. So, but when I experience beauty, and I know you have this, you want to share it with someone. So my immediate desire, I'd like you to see that. So we'll love the same things together, and two people amplifying their friendship by loving more of the same goods that they share.
Yes, there's Lewis again, right? And I think his reflections on the Psalms says it's when you give praise, it completes the joy.
It completes the joy, yes,
to do that.
Yes.
But why then do we have a tendency as Christians these days? This has not been the case throughout church history, but it has been lately. I think, maybe I'm wrong. You can set me straight if I'm wrong, Ken, but I think we have a tendency to overlook the role of beauty in drawing people. What now? Why? What's going on there?
Why is that? Because, again, God's approach to us in this world, though fallen, is through beauty. And I relate that to the work of the Holy Spirit. And that the beauty of the Spirit in the created order, and everything obeys God except us. So when we pray for His will to be done on earth as it is in heaven, we see everything else obeying it except for us. And we were waiting for that time when the King of Kings invades, and when the author comes onto the play, the play is over. But that's when the real story begins. But the idea of helping equip people to notice what's right in front of their eyes and they haven't really seen, because the scriptures command us really to use nature as a force multiplier for awe, for worship, for wonder. And if we ignore that, we ignore it, in my mind, to our peril and diminish our capacities.
So I think your approach is multivalent as usual, because you are Dr. Boa. That's what you do. But one of the places that you look for that amplification of our sense of beauty and awe and wonder, really at what the biblical writers call it, they'll use the phrase the wisdom of God.
The wisdom of God
that you're seeing in the
created order. Yes.
So you often focus on that through the lens of the sciences.
I do. I think, in fact, that's a very huge theme in my life as a scientist, and it's been the grace of God that I was called to be one, because I was always amazed by the concept of the mathematics of the cosmos and of the world, and I was always attracted as a boy to astronomy because of the vastness of that, and I learned enough about astronomy to be aware more than most people about what I'm looking at. And I realized on a starry night, I'm not looking up, I'm looking down. There's no up and down. And sometimes I'll have a feeling of terror, kind of a holy terror, a sense of holy awe that makes me long for more. And I'm both terrified but drawn to that mystery and wonder. And that idea of being drawn to the wonder but being overwhelmed by it as well. And I find that we can train ourselves to see it in the natural order if we choose to attend to the beauty that's all around us, but most people ignore.
You used a key word there, train.
Train.
Because you put in a lot of work.
Yeah.
To see, you mentioned the way some of these insects work together in a harmonious fashion. It'd be very easy for many of us to just walk by and say, "Oh my goodness, look, a bunch of bugs, gross."
Yes.
Or look at that, look at those mushrooms right there, gross. Rather than looking to see the underlying
wonders there are. Yes. I'll give you an example of that. When I was with some dear friends, we were meeting together at the Callaway Lodge and Spa for a retreat. We're a group of 12 of us who've been studying Conformed to His Image, met for the first time physically. And they're 4 soil disciples, so it's a really amazing collection of people whose spiritual vitality transcended the boundaries of Zoom. And actually, but when we were together, it was an epiphany. It was an astonishing to be just physically together, because we know that's what the corpus needs.
Of course.
When we were, among other things, we went to the Butterfly House, which I love to go to, and it's the Cecil B. Day Butterfly Center. But instead of the usual word from our sponsors, evolution and ecology, it was actually revealing that it was the God who made it, and that's the film that they still have there, where it shows that when the butterfly goes into a chrysalis, its third stage, and becomes a caterpillar. And the third, so it goes from the age, for 4 stages, and then from the caterpillar, it's going to become the metamorphosis will take place, but that it liquefies. And I remember the 3 of us looking at each other for the first time we heard that, and it was like a shared epiphany. How does it liquefy into goo and reconstitute itself into a new body plan that no longer is a funny-looking creature that munches on leaves, but rather is this glorious nectar-drinking wonder that flies? How can that be? And so to see that is to force ourselves to see new things. And then we were doing a collective sharing of what we were observing, the rest of the butterflies, and took lots of films. But then afterwards, we went out and looked at some of the areas where they had the native azaleas and so forth. And I noticed something I'd never seen before and read about, but I know it's true because I saw. I noticed that every azalea has 5 leaves, and but the 5 petals. But that there's 1 petal out of the 5 that's rich in color, and the others are not. In addition to that, the stamens point to that 1 leaf, 1 petal, not to the others. And so the anther and the filament of these stamens point to that particular one, and it's like a glory of God. It's like saying, here's the one. The others are ordinary. This one's extraordinary. Why is that? And I said, is that true just of this? And every azalea I saw had that same basic pattern. I'd never seen it before.
Deferential petals.
Deferential petals. So once again, you don't need that. This is gratuitous beauty. You don't need that level of things for the thing to fertilize and so forth. It's beyond what's necessary. And no reductionistic account will account for the beauty of orchids and all the other things that are involved. There's no slow way in which you can develop that. So I want believers to have a greater attention, and because attention, but you have to have an intention. So the more I intend to know God through His created order as He's commanded me to do, the more I will attend to what it shows me. And the more I attend, that's the training. where the more I train myself to notice patterns, the more I'm capable of seeing patterns. So this is my best spring yet. Each spring gets better than the one before. Because I now, each year, I'm getting better at seeing things that I couldn't see before.
You bring a better toolkit every time.
Yeah, but it's training in righteousness. It's in the righteousness of responsiveness to His glory through awe, through wonder, through curiosity, and through submission to the mystery that we call God, because everything is mystery. I can't understand a flower. I can't understand it. It's beyond my imagination.
Two ways you've helped me a lot here recently is by pointing on the one hand to the excessive nature of, those 4 petals pointing to the one that is exceptional.
Yeah, the 5th one, yeah.
And how that is gratuitous in the sense this organism doesn't need that to survive.
No.
So there's that excess, that abundance, and the proper way to look at that is to see that as a gift.
Yes.
But we have to be willing. We have to be in a posture where we are willing to receive it. That posture is one ideally of rapt attention, and worship would be the word there as well.
Worship would be the word.
But
yes.
I can't help but point out also. Now I can meddle a little bit. I'm meddling with my own life here. In order to do this kind of attention and this kind of focus, there are other things that we can pay less attention to. Maybe the constant barrage of doom scrolling. I'm not saying be irresponsible and don't find out what's going on in the world. I'm not saying don't pay attention to any of the campus protests at Columbia right now, or what's happening in Israel or with Russia and Ukraine. But I am saying that we do have a pronounced tendency to focus on many things that we can't control.
That's right.
That certainly ramp up our anxiety level.
That's correct.
And take our eyes off of the abundant gifts that are in our paths. And this is not some Panglossian bury your head in the sand, but it's cultivating that posture of worship. And you've helped me to see that. But then the other side here is also to see the sciences, the hard sciences, as, I'll use a phrase you like a lot, force multipliers for wonder.
For wonder.
Because the thinking, so much of the thinking and so much of the distrust of the hard sciences in the Christian community has to do with the sort of reductive models we often get. And I mean, even great Christian thinkers like Leslie Newbigin will say the invention of something like the telescope really caused us to have a diminished view of life, because now we see it as all in human hands and all in human control. He's no doubt there's some truth to that, but you've actually helped me to say, no, the telescope, the microscope, these are instruments of worship, is what they are.
A world of wonder. And then that is the first time that God's creation had a multiplier of its own. That is to say, the invention of the microscope and also of the telescope in the same century. It's not an accident that it happened, I think, in the 17th century, right at the point at which the general consensus was moving from a theistic consensus largely to by way of deism to a physicalist, a materialist, a diminished consensus of the impersonal plus time and chance. So, because it was too much of a cognitive dissonance to go from straight to theism to naturalism, materialism, but deism is a pathway which many people were able to follow. But isn't it interesting, and I think ironic, that it's in that very time, in the so-called Enlightenment, that century, in the 17th century, both the microscope and the telescope were revealed. You want to see? I was holding back. Now let me get you. Now you have a technology. You can see worlds within worlds within worlds you have no idea about, and the macrocosm that you had no grasp about. So that we now are seeing technology increasing in an exponential manner, so that it's actually worshiping God and showing that and drawing people to that wonder, although people are now stubbornly resisting it because of their natural quest for autonomy. But yet the evidence is strong. So we've talked about this before as well with Pascal, when he said that God has apportioned the evidence in such a way that there's just enough evidence to satisfy the mind of those who choose the way of faith, but enough ambiguity to allow the person who chooses to reject it to rationalize their disbelief. But so God, what does God do? Ironically and deliciously, he bumps up the ante of evidence and he uses science and technology to do it. I think that's a wonderful time to live.
That's a different perspective from what we
very
usually
different
hear.
From what we hear.
And it's very refreshing. And that's why I want to talk a little bit about the Encountering Beauty series. That this theme and topic of beauty has been on your mind for a while. And so you've got this series of conferences coming up, starting in July.
July 13th, yes. It's going to be at the Museum of the Bible. And they have this special theater that they call the World Stage Theater, and it's all digital and LED. It's LED experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty amazing. And I just visited this on this past Monday and saw that. And I'm impressed with some of the new things that they've done. But that whole idea is to cause people to see that nature itself is an invitation to wonder and to curiosity and to awe, and to also set their minds on the things above. And this is another thing that I think is very critical for us. We were talking about the culture. Yes, we don't want to be ignorant. We need to understand our times and know what we ought to do. But when you hear about a text like Philippians 4:8, where we're commanded, and when he tells us whatever is true and whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure and lovely, whatever is of good repute. And then he says, if there's anything excellent, worthy of praise, what are we commanded to do? It's not a suggestion. Dwell on these things, chew on these things, which means I can take the opposite of those things, and it's a good definition of the news. Whatever is false, whatever is dishonorable, whatever is wrong, whatever is impure, whatever is not lovely, whatever is of bad repute, if there is any shoddiness, anything worthy of condemnation, that's where people dwell. And
that's pretty pitch perfect, actually.
It's pitch perfect.
Yes.
So I want to be aware of it, but I want to train people to see that you're surrounded by and immersed by mystery. Every step that you go outside, do you not hear the birds? And most people they haven't trained themselves to hear the birds, the insects, the wind, the sense of the color, the light, the beauty. Any leaf, any flower will do, any bit of bark. And so if the more they do it, to me, they're honoring God by saying, look, you created this. And those are filled with mystery that transcends anything we can do in our technology. So to me, that's a very important theme. So this whole idea of beauty in the sciences is very important to me. And the microcosm, the midi, and the macrocosm,
What strikes me, Ken, as you say that, is that I think so often the public perception about a life of holiness and sanctity is that it's very boring, it's possibly legalistic, it's very stuffy. But when you actually take into account what you're saying, when you read about the lives of people we celebrate who gave themselves completely and totally to God, not perfect men and women, but remarkable men and women, you suddenly find that they were people who were radiant, anything but boring, exceptionally aware of the majesty and the riches of God's abundant creation. And it's all here, and it's all around us.
It's there, but
all
they
the
don't
time.
see it. They haven't trained themselves to see. They have eyes to see, they don't see, ears to hear, they haven't heard. So this whole idea it's one of the things I love about Jonathan Edwards was the fact that he was a naturalist and he understood he loved spiders. And the more you learn, and there are things that he would love to know now that we've discovered about them that just are astounding. But the 5 kinds of silk and what they do, and they are marvels and wonders that where it pitches 75 feet out, and then it's able to walk on it. So these are wonders, and then it builds these wonderful things that no one understands, stronger than steel, and yet it can retract and reuse it. So the more we learn about the created order, the more I marvel. So I want to train people. Notice this. So and notice, look through that, and you'll discover the fringes of the ways of God. It's everything is proportioned mathematically. The Fibonacci series, the perfect ratio, the golden mean, all these other things that are hardwired, and nature is hardwired. I just really recently found out that the difference between the length of a river and the distance of a river is the perfect ratio of pi.
Is that right?
Say, so that when we say the length of the river, that's actually how it goes. But then the distance in terms of miles of reach, and so it's a perfect ratio. No one understands this. Why that is. So the world is filled with nature, and then us people, philosophers, will say, "Well, is it because we've put nature into it? Do we do it, or is it actually there? And it's both. We see it, but we resonate, and we're image bearers of the Imago Dei who can actually use nature, and it points beyond itself as a multiplier to the one who made it, because we're spiritual beings. So science is our friend, it's our ally, and the more we learn about the created order, the more astonished we become, not the less, if we have eyes to see and ears to hear. Cephalopods, I'm just looking at marvels like this, and the cuttlefish, the squid, the octopuses, and so forth. And so the more I learn about any of these things, I find it's a delightful thing to learn about the ways of God. So we've organized all of nature really into 12 basic categories. So one would be aquariums. That'll cover that. But that's where we'll have cephalopods, and we have 24 journeys within each of these 12 categories, which leads to the 288 journeys we have in this app mobile app we're going to have.
Wow.
And it just goes on. So if I can help a person be trained, note that flower, note this. I was just leaving a restaurant yesterday, and there was these beautiful hibiscus, and I wonder how many people noticed them and just saw it's a world within a world right outside the restaurant. But most people, I think it would be interesting to see that. It's like the violinist who
set up in the subway in D.C.
Set up in the subway, and no one heard him. Joshua, right. Is it? The
name escapes me, but
right
world class violinist.
And yes. It was a marvel that no one except for some children, they noticed. I mean, the mother pulled them away. Now that brings us down to the childlike wonder. Because I want you and me to become more like children, have a childlike, the second naivete, not the childishness, but a childlike wonder, and at play in the fields of God. And then you're focusing on what you want rather than what you don't want.
So much of what you have said really comes down to what we choose to do with our attention. And I think there's a very practical takeaway there, a very convicting takeaway.
Yes. Because
just like those people who were in that subway walking past that world-class violinist, I could think of myself busy, anxious, worried about many, many things. Like a certain Martha.
Like a certain Martha we read about, yeah.
Everything. I find Martha very, very relatable. But many things on our minds, things that have to get done, emails we need to answer. Not saying that, we don't have important items in our schedules and all that, but we when we think about attention in those terms, I think we have to face the fact that a lot of what we pay attention to isn't worth our attention, and we need to refocus. And if we do so, we'll be entering into a life of greater joy and in greater peace, which is available to us even in our cultural moment, which for so many people, just judging by the conversations I'm having, Ken, is a very oppressive and scary one. I get that. But we do have a hand in what we pay attention to. And I think
we get to choose what we're going to focus on. And if I focus on that which is just the opposite of Philippians 4:8, I'm going to it'll little wonder then that I'll feel a sense of alienation, of loneliness, of isolation, and it's never wise to avoid what I don't want, but rather to pursue what I do want. So it's focusing on the true and the right and the beautiful, to see a heaven in a grain of sand and a world and a wildflower. Hold it, infinity in the palm of your hands and eternity in an hour. That William Blake idea of seeing that, but seeing it with new eyes. Songs of innocence and experience, but from the lamb, little lamb and the tiger. But did he who make the lamb make thee? And so realizing both his awe and his tenderness. He's both transcendent and he's immanent, and he's to be feared, yes. But he's he's not tame, but he's a good. He's good, I tell you, Aslan. And so
Well, that's very well said. If you are in the D.C. area, by the way, on July 13th, we would love to see you at the Encountering Beauty Conference at the Museum of the Bible. What will be a real pleasure there is, with the capacities of this venue, Ken can take you on a guided tour of nature's wonders.
Yeah.
He's a wonderful curator. Many of you know that already. But that promises to be a wonderful experience, and we would love to see you there. We're very excited about this partnership with the Museum of the Bible.
Yes,
in
we
DC.
are. And we've got some players already for sure. Guillermo Gonzalez, who wrote The Privileged Planet. So he will focus on the fine-tuning parameters, and we have others as well who are going to be focusing. I'm going to be speaking about science, faith, and reason. But the idea of seeing how nature, science, is actually a vehicle by which we amplify our worship and appreciation of the one who made it on every order of magnitude. But you've got to be willing to see it. We all need the Copernican revolution of moving from an egocentric to a Christocentric vision of our lives.
Well, thank you so much, Ken. This has been a joy as always. And thank you for listening to the Explorers podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a part of the Explorers podcast. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.